Officer, is everything okay? That human.
He's speaking the Queen's old tongue. No one's spoken it in centuries.
Watch Officer Den Caraxis had faced down smugglers, a hull breach, and one extremely opinionated diplomatic parrot without so much as raising her voice. She raised it now, just barely, when the human at the dessert table opened his mouth and the old tongue came out. "My name's Dave. I run catering logistics for the Meridian Embassy, which mostly means keeping the shrimp puff stocked and the ice buckets full before anybody important notices they're empty. It's not glamorous, but nobody yells at me, which is more than most jobs can say. Tonight's gala was for a visiting dignitary, Queen Virel Ashaya of the Ashbane Dominion, tall, moth-winged, very polite, wrapped in about 9 yards of ceremonial silk. I was refilling water glasses near her table when her translator earpiece let out a sad little beep and died. She looked mildly panicked, glancing around for anyone, who could help. So I said the first calming thing that came to mind, in her language, because I happen to know it, the way you know a song you haven't heard in years, but can still hum note for note. Den didn't catch the words. She caught the Queen's face, which went from polite fatigue to something else entirely, something Den had only seen twice before, once during a coronation, once during a funeral. She kept her hand near her sidearm and started walking, slow, casual, toward the dessert table, wondering who in the void had taught a catering assistant to speak Ashbane court dialect, and why nobody had flagged it before he was standing 3 feet from the throne. 2 systems away, embedded xenolinguist Dr. Salevurin was monitoring the gala feed for exactly this kind of thing, foreign officials misusing honorifics, mostly the boring stuff that filled her quarterly reports. She rewound the audio 3 times. The vowels were wrong for modern Ashbane. They were wrong in a very specific, very old way. "That's not common Ashbane," she said to an empty room. "That's liturgical." Nobody had spoken liturgical Ashbane outside the royal bloodline in 400 years. The grammar alone required training most scholars spent a decade acquiring. She reached for the emergency line and then hesitated, because if she was wrong, she just triggered a diplomatic incident over a guy topping off water glasses. She wasn't wrong. Fleet Commander Yorick Thess got the call mid-dinner, which he resented, and the transcript, which he resented more. He read it twice. The human hadn't just spoken the liturgical dialect. He'd used the greeting reserved for addressing the throne directly, the one carved into the floor of the Ashbane Royal Hall and nowhere else, the one no outsider had been taught in living memory because teaching it was, technically, an executable offense. Yorick set down his fork. "Pull every record we have on this embassy," he said. "Every one. Staff rosters, visa applications, everything." They found nothing useful. No language training, no cultural attaché flags, no prior contact reports of any kind. Just a man named Dave, employment history entirely food service, security clearance low enough to be a rounding error on somebody's spreadsheet. Back at the gala, Den had reached the dessert table and was close enough now to hear it clearly. The accent wasn't just correct, it was regional, the specific cadence used only by the founding dynasty 5 centuries ago, preserved nowhere but ceremonial recordings sealed inside the palace archive. She'd studied that archive for 2 years to pass her officer's exam and still couldn't manage the tonal shift on the 3rd syllable. This man did it without thinking, mid-sentence, while asking the Queen if she wanted him to grab her a napkin. "Ma'am," Den said quietly into her calm, "I need someone from Cultural Affairs down here immediately, and I need them to not panic when I explain why." Yorick's honor guard was already moving, boots on marble. Nobody quite sure yet whether they were escorting a threat out of the room or protecting the single most linguistically improbable man in the Dominion. Nobody wanted to be the one who guessed wrong in front of the Queen, and for the first time in his career, Yorick genuinely didn't know which order to give. "Sir," his adjutant said, "do we detain him?" "On what charge?" "Excellent pronunciation." Yorick rubbed his temples. "Get me the archivists. If I'm about to arrest a caterer for a crime against liturgy, I want precedent first." There was no precedent. There had never needed to be. Sale found it 4 minutes later, cross-referencing the transcript against the liturgical archive, and felt something cold settle behind her ribs. The phrase Dave had used wasn't just a greeting. It was the opening line of the bonding address, the formal declaration spoken only between the Queen and someone she was extending sworn protection to, or, depending on an interpretation neither she nor anyone alive had ever needed to test, someone she was accepting protection from. It hadn't been spoken by anyone outside the bloodline in 4 centuries. It required a spoken response from the Queen to activate, and it was, under HFY law, irreversible the moment that response left her mouth. She stared at the feed, hands frozen over her console. Somewhere in her training, a professor's voice reminded her that the bonding address hadn't just fallen out of use. It had been deliberately buried, its teaching outlawed specifically so no foreign power could ever manufacture this exact scenario. And yet here it was, spoken flawlessly by a man whose entire professional history involved trays of shrimp puffs. The Queen was still talking to him. Queen Virel Ashaya had heard her own dead language spoken correctly, in her own dead grandmother's exact accent, by a stranger holding a pitcher of ice water, and she had done what any reasonable person does when startled into old habit. She'd answered. Properly. Completely. Out loud. In front of 40 witnesses and at least 6 recording devices, none of which she'd thought to consider until it was already far too late. By the time Yorick's people burst into the ballroom, sidearms lowered but ready, it was already done. The bond was spoken, sealed, and, per 600 years of unbroken precedent, permanent. Oh, that. I said, when someone finally sat me down and explained, very slowly, what I'd apparently just done to interstellar law. I learned it off an audio guide. There's a Lost Languages of the Cosmos exhibit at the Science Museum, right by the food court, and I used to eat lunch there because it's quiet and nobody bothers you. I thought the recording was for some old dead empire, not, like, a current one with a queen who still shows up to things. I practiced the pronunciation because I was trying to impress a date. She never actually showed up. The phrase just kind of stuck with me, the way jingles do. Nobody in the room said anything for a while. Somebody finally asked if I'd like to sit down, even though I already was. A very stressed man in cultural affairs robes asked me 3 separate times if I understood what a sovereign bonding meant under HFY succession law. I did not. He explained it anyway, at length, using words like consort adjacent and unbreakable, and I nodded along the way you nod when someone explains a tax form you're never going to read twice. Queen Virel, for her part, seemed less alarmed than everyone around her. She looked at Dave, sworn protector, accidental keeper of the oldest bond in HFY law, current holder of a security clearance low enough to be a rounding error, with something like relief. You are now, she said, through a hastily repaired earpiece, the most legally significant commoner in 6 star systems. Cool, I said. Does that get me a discount on the shrimp puffs, or? She laughed. Actual, undignified laughter, the kind her aides later admitted they'd never once heard from her in 11 years of service. Somewhere behind her, Commander Yorick was already drafting paperwork nobody had a template for, and Dr. Sale was staring at a museum gift shop receipt like it was a declaration of war. I just went back to refilling water glasses. Somebody's got to keep this place running, sworn protector of 6 star systems or not. 3 tables over, Den was quietly telling a very junior officer that no, this was not in the training manual, and yes, she'd be adding a chapter.